And what became important was only what the doctor said. Now, we have had a revolt against that, as Dr. Anderson mentioned this morning, in the form of asking patients to exercise informed consent. At the same time that this notion of turning in on oneself in the profession became obvious, there was also a revelation of aberrations, of injuries that were caused in scientific research. And the research protocol for many research people became the end of the occupation. To have a successful protocol, to have a successful research project was much more important to the people conducting the project than were the people who were enrolled. And one example of this was the Tuskegee Institute, which any of you who have read anything on bioethics will understand was a study conducted down in Alabama of men who had syphilis. And during the project, the purpose of the study was to find out what happened to these people, how they deteriorated in mind and body as a result of syphilis. But halfway through the study, a cure for syphilis, or at least an amelioration of syphilis, became common knowledge. But the researchers never revealed this to the subjects. So you see, there was, among the research of those doing research, there was also this notion that what I'm doing is more important than the patient. And in addition to those two aberrations, we had many new ideas and many new problems coming forth in medicine and in healthcare. One of the problems, of course, was a result of successful transplants from living people to non-living people. Excuse me, from non-living people to living people. So you see, the idea was that when a person dies, you can take the organ and give it to someone else. But the problem was, when do people die? Another problem at the time had to do with genetic research and who should offer informed consent and things of that nature. So in other words, you had these three developments that gave rise to a new term for ethics in the life sciences. It was called bioethics. Now, in the field of bioethics, let us say what I'm going to call the secular tradition, not as a pejorative term, but simply to indicate that it is separate from our Christian Catholic tradition. But in this field of bioethics at the time, the idea was that the bioethics person became a decision maker in the complex of either medical care or research. In other words, what the person who claimed to be a bioethicist could offer was independent of medicine and healthcare. One of my friends, David Rothman, wrote a book in the 1980s to indicate this change. And the book was entitled Strangers at the Bedside. Subtitle, How Medicine and Law, how Bioethics and Law Have Changed the Diagnosis in Medicine. In other words, how bioethics and law kind of became an added force in the medical decision-making complex. So you have then a development of something called bioethics, which really is a development of the traditional ethics that should have been prominent, should have been relevant within the field of medicine and within the field of research. And then again, to face the new problems that were surfacing. Now, in the Catholic tradition, we have also done quite a bit to humanize medical care and research through the offerings of our Catholic tradition. The notion that the Catholic tradition is a little bit different is not something that everyone is going to agree with. But from my experience, it is true that in the Catholic tradition, the role of the bioethicist is not to be another voice, another decision maker, but rather to help the people who are the decision makers to make proper decisions. You know, Socrates in his, or Plato in talking about Socrates, quotes Socrates as saying that I am a midwife when I act as a philosopher. In other words, a midwife helps the person who is doing the childbearing, but does not try to take the place of the person doing the childbearing. And this is what I would say about bioethics in the Catholic field. You know, in the Church, we have always looked upon the practice of medicine as one of the ways to bring the presence of Christ to people. In the United States, for example, we have 600 Catholic hospitals, and we have over 500 nursing homes. We have many schools of nursing. We have 5 different schools of medicine in the country. So you see that medicine has always been an intrinsic part of the Catholic proposition for health. When we speak about the Catholic contribution to bioethics, we want to also speak about the statements of the Vatican and some of the official documents, the ethical and religious directives, for example, that we have from the bishops. So when the talk about bioethics comes in the Catholic tradition, we certainly want to say, yes, we are part of that tradition, but we have a slightly different vision of what the bioethicist should add to the decision-making practice. Lastly, let us talk about how to practice, how to prepare for the practice of bioethics. And here we have, first of all, the notion that bioethics is a practical science. It's not a speculative science. And every practical science is an art, but it also requires clinical experience. Now, when bioethics came to be popular in the United States as a term and as a profession, many people just joined in because they had degrees in law, they had degrees in philosophy or theology. They had an interest in ethics for medicine and healthcare, but they did not have any clinical experience. So I would say that some of the weaker people in this field have not had clinical experience. They don't know what patients are going through. They don't know what families are going through. So when we speak about helping people, we have to have that practical knowledge. The speculative knowledge that's needed is not the same as we think about when we're educating physicians, but rather educating to the extent that people know what's happening in the medical situation. I have, therefore, talked about the knowledge, talked about the clinical experience, and the last thing I want to talk about is the motivation that anyone in these helping professions should have, especially the motivation that should dominate insofar as healthcare is concerned, and that is love of the patient. Now, when I use the word love, I realize that it can be misleading because in English, as you well know, we use that term to say we love medicine, or we love food, we love Elvis, or we love something or other. But the real meaning of it is found in the word agape, because that refines the notion of love, to give to people what they need, to help them because they are in need. Not because it makes us look good, or not because of the prestige that we might give. So in the notion then of helping others, we have this term agape. The last thing that I want to talk about is the most sensitive issue in bioethics, and that is helping those who are dying. Ron Hamill will talk about this afternoon. Teresa's going to say something about this, so I'm not going to go into it, save to say that dying is a natural event in our lives. Dying is not something that happens by accident. Our birth didn't happen by accident. Dying doesn't happen by accident. Dying is natural. And last thing I will say is that Dr. Anderson talked about the ugliness of death. I would talk about the beauty of death, provided people have prepared for it. One of my friends died about 15 years ago. Everything is a little longer. That's one thing that happens when you get to be a senior scholar. Everything is farther in the past. But anyhow, he died of a heart attack, sudden heart attack. And he was a friend of Mother Teresa. And so when he died, they sent her a telegram and said, Bill, his name is Bill Cogan. I don't know whether any of you ever know, but Bill Cogan has died. And she sent back a telegram the same day. What wonderful news. Yeah, but that's the way we should look upon that. Thank you very much.